All right, welcome back everyone to another edition of our legislative interview series. I am thrilled to have Becky Harper with us today. Becky, thank you so much for joining us, taking time out of your day to talk about a bunch of things that I have outlined, but thank you very much for being here.
Sure.
So obviously want to congratulate you and your work on the Moore versus Harper decision. I think it's a decision from the Supreme Court that a lot of our membership is aware of, but I'm not sure all of our membership is aware of it. So I thought this would be a great time to basically, have you, someone who was on the front lines of this decision, explain to our membership the impact of this decision and how it will affect all of North Carolina, but also in a larger scale, our country.
Well, it's been a long road, and the way it all played out in the end, unfortunately, it will have almost no impact in North Carolina, but tremendous impact nationwide. Many people have called Moore v. Harper the most significant constitutional case in the last 100 years or more. It was a really big deal. And what it had to do was some language in the Constitution that had never really been tested constitutionally at the Supreme Court level, regarding the role and the rights of the elected legislature in various states. And the argument that our legislature was making here in North Carolina, the majority party in the legislature was arguing that as the legislature, they had unrestricted power, unlimited power to set rules for federal elections. And that includes everything from polling places to how elections would be carried out, voter registration, whether or not there's early voting, what the rules are around absentee ballots, and possibly even how electors for President of the United States were selected in each state. This argument, which was called the independent state legislature theory, was at the root of the arguments that were being made around the 2020 election that would have allowed, where some states, where there were efforts in some states to try to change the result of the popular vote and appoint electors who would vote for Trump, even though Biden had won in those states. So it was a really big deal, and it was a great victory at the Supreme Court. We won 6-3, and with some of the conservative justices voting in favor of the Harper side.
Was it a surreal moment, not only to have that victory, but also to have your name on such an important decision that shapes the landscape of this country?
It's been fun. It's been exciting. I found out when my phone started, I found out that we'd won when my phone started blowing up. I didn't know in advance, obviously. And while my name is on this case, I am really a figurehead plaintiff, right? I am not a lawyer. I was not responsible for raising the money to pay the lawyers, or I was not involved in the legal strategy behind the case. Just like other famous cases, Roe versus Wade, Brown versus Board of Education, those people whose names ended up on Supreme Court cases were not necessarily driving the train.
Understood. It's still one of those things that your name synonymous in history now with many other famous cases that you mentioned. So it must be a little bit of a surreal moment, but I appreciate the way you outline sort of how this decision came about. But I wanted to ask you, where did your love for advocacy come from? Where did it begin? Because I think that it's one thing to say you're going to be involved in a cause and work towards it, but it's another thing to have such a monumental victory like you mentioned. So where did that all begin? And was it something that was at the beginning of your life or something that you sort of came into?
So I've always been politically active, a political junkie, you might say. Obviously at various times in my life, more or less, I volunteer on campaigns, I give money, I'm pretty well informed about the issues of the day. This case is a result of 4 years of effort. My name was on 2 previous cases here in North Carolina, Harper v. Lewis and Harper v. Hall. And those were gerrymandering cases, pure and simple. I have been very concerned for a number of years about the way that our districts here in North Carolina have been gerrymandered by the party that is currently in power. Now, I will be the first to tell you that gerrymandering is a bipartisan sin, and the fundamental thing to understand about gerrymandering is that people in power like to fix the game so that they can stay in power. And both parties do it, and certainly Democrats did it when they had the majorities in North Carolina for many years. But because of big data and the technology that's available now, it is far easier to pinpoint how various voters are likely to vote. And it's much easier to gerrymander very precisely. And that's what's been going on, not just in North Carolina, but nationwide for a number of years. And what it does is it takes away the ability of voters to actually choose their representatives. And that is fundamentally the whole purpose. I mean, that's the basis, the fundamental foundation of democracy. Voters get to pick their representatives. But with gerrymandering, what happens is the elected officials get to pick their voters. So it's completely backwards. And what it leads to is extremist candidates. It leads to districts where there's not even any competition, where one party is so sure of winning the election that the other party doesn't even bother to field a candidate. And so voters have no choice. And that produces candidates who care more about the primary election than they do about the general election. And you get extremists on both sides. And I think that has been corrupting and extremely dangerous for our democracy. And I think that gerrymandering is a root cause of the polarization that we have in the country today. So I've been very concerned about it. It's gotten worse and worse in North Carolina. It's quite amusing that the Tim Moore and Phil Berger, who are, of course, the current leaders in the legislature, when they were in the minority, they introduced many bills to set up nonpartisan redistricting commissions, et cetera. They were all in favor of a fair redistricting process. And then when their party got into power, they completely dropped all of that and have been engaged in fixing the elections through gerrymandering ever since. And so anyway, that is what I have cared about. And it was a result of those 2 earlier cases. Moore v. Harper is really an appeal of our victory in Harper v. Hall.
I
Oh,
appreciate.
that's very long-winded.
No, I appreciate it. Someone, I got my career started working on political campaigns in New York. So I think this has always been an issue, like you mentioned, in not just North Carolina, but throughout the country. And I think, the passion in which you speak about it shows how important that it is. So I, for one, appreciate that. I did want to switch gears a little bit, obviously, talk a little bit of real estate, realtor news, how the legislature and our elected officials might be able to impact that. So we'll start with housing inventory and affordability. These are issues that seem to come up a lot. At what point do you think, some action needs to be taken as opposed to it just being discussion topics? And what do you think needs to be done to solve the problems in a timely manner? Those problems being the inventory issue and the affordability issue with homes.
So a lot of it is a market I mean, most of it, it's a problem. It's a market function. And what we have is a high demand and short supply. And when you have that imbalance, you need to create more supply. And unfortunately, creating supply is something that a lot of current residents don't want to do. So I think the realtors are stuck between a rock and a hard place on that issue. Everybody likes their single family neighborhoods with their, dreams of a white picket fence and a backyard and all that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, that kind of housing in urban areas is not the most, is problematic for many reasons. So, and unfortunately, the zoning law, which we all take to be just a normal thing that local governments do, has some pretty ugly roots in very racist policies from the history of this country. And so what you've got is a group of relatively well-off, the haves, homeowners who don't want things to change. And that is blocking out people who want to get into the market. So the solution is density. The solution is relaxing zoning standards. Now that doesn't mean building willy-nilly. It doesn't mean that protecting watersheds is not still important. It doesn't mean that that we don't have issues with flood control and all the rest of it. Those are certainly important. The pictures on the TV from Vermont are pretty overwhelming this week. So, but it does mean that we need a different style of development in the urban areas where the demand is, where the jobs are, where people want to live. And that means some pain from existing homeowners.
Yeah, you just mentioned something that I find interesting in terms of the impact of the longer commutes, of not having your, I guess you would say, essential workers, your police, your fire, teachers, nurses, doctors, not being able to live in the community where they work. What's your opinion on that impact that it has overall with those people and with the community as a whole?
I think it's a huge problem. And frankly, we've been talking about that for decades. I mean, the realtors have been talking about that for decades. Now, you can provide subsidies, you can provide first-time owner grants, you can do things through the tax code, et cetera, et cetera. There's ways to help certain target groups, but when you do that, if there's no supply and there's more buyers, it's just going to drive up prices. So, I don't think that there is a solution when you have a supply and demand problem that does not involve increasing supply and increasing supply substantially. And, you know, it also means that the backyard and the white picket fence are going to be out of reach for a large numbers of people. And large numbers of younger people are going to be in townhomes and apartment style condos and things like that. So, you know, it's a different version of the American dream. But I think I don't see a solution to the supply problem with any other kind of program. To make housing affordable, you know, well, it's also coming to terms with the reality that large numbers of people are going to be renters. And we as realtors don't like to think about that, but that is reality. And you can subsidize rents to some extent. But again, addressing supply, I think, is an essential part of that.
Yeah, I think you've hit it right on the head. I mean, I'll speak from my own personal experience, and I've told this story to many people. You know, I guess I'm in that bracket of quote unquote being a young professional, just recently turned 30. I moved to North Carolina in 2018, the end of 2018. I purchased my home in 2019. The market was much different than it is now. If I was in, if it was now, if I moved down here now, I don't know if owning a home would be a real possibility right now. And I think that has to be the reality. And we talk about it all the time, you know, realtors and everyone that works in this organization. Sometimes, you know, you don't want to hear that or realize the reality that there will be a lot of renters, but until something changes, renting is still going to be an option for people. And I think it's important whenever you're discussing an issue to talk about the positives, the negatives, and look at every side. And I think by avoiding some of the downfalls of what we're dealing with, it's tougher to create solutions. So I think it's important that you identify that. So I appreciate that. You know, another thing, hopefully this helps. Washington Post came out with a study yesterday that said inflation was on the decline, the best inflation numbers we've had in quite some time. Sort of maybe finally coming out of this pandemic, whatever you want to call it, this pandemic era, hopefully, of the economy. Maybe that'll play a role in maybe supply chain improving in order for more houses to be built. Do you think there's any correlation? I know we're always trying to connect dots, but do you think there's any correlation with inflation coming down, people having more money in their pocket, and maybe that creates some more home ownership?
I really don't, because there's nothing to buy. And there, obviously prices have gone up, labor's gone up, lumber's gone up, et cetera. But those are not the root of the problem. The problem is a supply problem, and we need to build a lot. And we have not been building housing. We have not been producing housing at the levels that are necessary for decades. There's a mismatch between population growth and a number of units that we have. And so I don't think that it's a supply chain issue. I mean, the overall economy, I mean, inflation numbers, I mean, they're great, but the reality is, it seems from everything I read, you know, on the one hand, the economy is actually great. And yet everybody says they're miserable, right? Everybody's unhappy. I mean, you know, if a president if a president 20 years ago had these kind of numbers, he'd be a shoo-in for re-election, right? And now you have really a strong economy, notable successes on the economic front, and everybody's unhappy. So So anyway, I don't think it's going to fix it. And certainly lower interest rates would, and you're very lucky that you bought when you did, because you'll
Sure.
never be able to afford to move because you have what, a 3 or 4% mortgage.
Right. Yeah, I think, you make a good point there. I think for whatever reason, I think the general public needs to see more quote unquote proof in the pudding. Maybe when their groceries go down, maybe when their gas starts to go down, maybe then they'll believe that the inflation has dropped, that things are better. But I think you make a great point there. I think people still seem to be in the zone where they are unhappy with what they're paying for things.
Exactly. And gas is dirt cheap. I mean, we're paying $3 a gallon for gas. I mean, that's cheap. And honestly, there is a problem with global warming, and we should be paying probably twice that for gas, because we should be trying to discourage the easy, but gasoline is in this country a barometer of how everybody's feeling, and that contributes to our inability to move on some of the larger issues that we should be moving on. And now you've got people burning up or flooding in Vermont, 120 degrees in Arizona, fires everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
Is the public going to come to terms with the fact that, we have to do big things now to address climate? And I have been extremely frustrated for years because the realtors are just putting their heads in the damn sand over that issue.
So let's, to that point, your opinion on that. I think this is a good follow-up question. What would you like to see from realtors moving forward from an advocacy perspective, and getting involved within legislative and government affairs and tackling some issues head on?
So I think the realtors have a hard time looking at the big picture. And climate change is a good example of that. I mean, I can remember your predecessor, probably 4 predecessors ago, who just went on and on about the evils of cap and trade and the nonsense about global warming and, the conspiracy theory people who were spouting all this nonsense and so forth. I mean, that's the position of a lot of the leadership, unfortunately. And whether their views on that have changed, and whether I don't know how to measure that. I guess we could look at where the money is going in terms of the candidates we support. But I mean, I have been concerned for a very long time that, our definition of a realtor issue is so narrow that we can't look at the big picture. But it's very hard in a group like this that is very diverse in terms of viewpoints, and not a voluntary group. It's a group that people are forced to join. They are not part of the Realtor Association because they share the views of the association, or they're looking to the association to guide them on these issues. And so it's a challenge.
Let me ask you this in a follow-up to that, because I understand your point, and I think a counterpoint to some of that would be there are these large-scale issues. Some people focus solely on their wallet. What they're seeing is money coming in. If money's coming in, I'm in a better position to negotiate and do other things. When the average salary in the average household income, I should say, in Raleigh is something like $74,000. Do you think that there is correlation? I know you said that this has been an issue for years, but do you think that there is correlation to people having more money in their pocket, being more willing to advocate? Or is it just something that it's a big picture issue? It doesn't involve me on a day-to-day basis, and therefore I'm just not going to pay attention to it.
Are you talking about The general public, or you're talking about our Realtor membership?
I think I think the general public, but I think the Realtor membership also kind of falls into that. If they're not having money in their pocket, if the market's slow, does it impact them and how hard they want to fight for issues that they don't think really matter? Because
I think that's absolutely the case. Yeah. And you know, the huge number of our members are just going to say, you know, your job is to make sure that my back is protected. I'm making as much money as I can, and I don't want to hear about anything else. So.
and your point would be that you think that needs to change because there's a lot of issues that might not necessarily fit into the bucket of realtor issues, but if you look at it from a larger perspective, a lot of issues impact realtors and the market and everything that goes into it.
Well, true. You know, I have accepted for many years that my views are not generally the majority at the Realtor Association. So, you know, I am what you might call a dissident.
Well, I appreciate the openness, the honesty that you've had here today. I think it's probably the most engaging and open conversation that we've had here so far. And I think,
what are you doing with these recordings?
So they go on our YouTube channel, and we'll promote them there, and it gives our membership an opportunity to listen to the interview and hopefully become more informed. And I think that there's a lot of information here that will help our membership. And I think whether or not people agree or disagree with your opinion, they have to respect the openness, the hard work. And the only way to get things done, in my opinion, is to have a conversation. And whether you're on one side or the other, if you're not going to talk, then there's not much hope. So I think I hope that everyone sees that, at least when they. So Becky, I took up a decent amount of your time here. I could have probably talked to you for another hour or so. So maybe we'll have to do a part 2, but I really appreciate you coming on today. And you know, your work and your commitment is admirable, and I appreciate it for one.
Thank you so much. And I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Thank you.